nos complace enormemente que la Alianza para el Gobierno Abierto, muy bien representada el día de hoy, particularmente por su presidente, Sanjay Pradhan, qué gusto verte, haya generado esta sesión en el marco de la semana de la reunión general de los consejeros de la GIFT. Para nosotros es muy significativo porque ante la terrible crisis de la pandemia, los gobiernos y la sociedad han encontrado pocas salidas. Una de ellas es el gobierno abierto. Una de ellas es la cooperación. Una de ellas es la participación, la co-creación, la complementariedad entre gobierno y sociedad civil. Y de esto es el esfuerzo que hace la OGP, y de esto vamos a hablar en esta sesión. Así que yo solo celebro que esto ocurra y les doy la más cordial bienvenida.
Muchísimas gracias, Juan Pablo. Bueno, tomo la posta. Para nosotros es un honor. Me voy a presentar. Mi nombre es Rosario Pavese. Yo soy coordinadora de apoyo a países para la unidad de apoyo de la Alianza para el Gobierno Abierto. Y la verdad, lo primero, darles la bienvenida a todas y todos por estar acá. Sabemos que es una semana intensa para ustedes. Y agradecer muchísimo a GIF por esta oportunidad. Es una reunión muy importante para todos ustedes, para definir sus estrategias y cómo van a seguir trabajando en los próximos meses en un contexto tan complejo. Solo para aclarar que tenemos traducción español-inglés, inglés-español. En el chat encontrarán algunas indicaciones específicas si todavía no lo pudieron activar y en caso de que lo necesiten. Y también comentarles que están presentes varios miembros de la unidad de apoyo de OGP, algunos con los que ustedes están acostumbrados a interactuar, como Alonso Cerdán, Paula Pérez, Pepe, José de Comunicación, y por supuesto nuestro director ejecutivo Sanjay Pradhan, que va a ser nuestro primer orador. Para no extenderme demasiado, solo comentarles cuál es el objetivo de este encuentro. Como decía Juan Pablo, hemos visto en estos últimos meses que es vital que adoptemos un enfoque de apertura, de gobierno abierto en el contexto de la emergencia global. OGP en ese sentido lanzó una campaña que denominamos Respuesta Abierta, Recuperación Abierta, con el objetivo de incorporar este paradigma de apertura en varios ámbitos de la respuesta a la emergencia, pero en particular hoy queremos conversar con ustedes acerca de aquellos que tienen que ver con los paquetes de estímulo, las redes de seguridad, todo tipo de información fiscal y de programas que sabemos en los que ustedes trabajan muchísimo, y que hay una serie de ideas, de experiencias que queremos compartir sobre cómo organizaciones y gobiernos están adoptando este enfoque. Entonces, sin más, me gustaría darle la palabra a Sanjay Pradhan, director ejecutivo de la Alianza para el Gobierno Abierto, que nos va a hablar un poco más sobre esta campaña.
Thank you, Rosario. Very warm hello to everyone, and special thanks to our wonderful partners, GIFT and Juan Pablo Guerrero, for convening this important conversation. So we meet at a unique moment in human history. We are confronting the most devastating pandemic in 100 years. We are in the midst of the worst global recession since World War II. In Latin America, GDP will fall by over 9% in 2020. 230 million people will fall below the poverty line, and 44 million will be unemployed. Amidst this unprecedented devastation, at this same moment in history, we have a unique opportunity to make a difference, a big difference. How? By ensuring that the massive COVID-19 stimulus and safety net packages achieve their vital goals of saving millions of lives and livelihoods. You know, staggering amounts of resources are at stake. Government and international organizations have already invested more than $20 trillion for the biggest recovery packages we have seen since World War II. Latin American countries have already invested more than 4.5% of GDP. But beyond these massive resources, millions of lives and livelihoods depend upon the effective implementation of these stimulus and safety net packages. Across countries, these packages are seeking to provide life-saving medical treatments and supplies at scale, which can save millions of lives. They're seeking to provide safety nets for millions of vulnerable groups. They're seeking to provide subsidies and credits to protect millions of jobs across thousands of SMEs, major infrastructure investments, tax and regulatory incentives to provide employment for millions of unemployed. So you can see that the effectiveness of these packages is of profound economic and social significance, but beyond that, it is also a moral imperative. But we also know that when so much money moves so fast during a pandemic, there is a major risk of corruption, capture, and a failure to reach those people who most need the help. And we're already seeing corruption scandals mushroom for COVID-19 funds around the globe. For instance, in Brazil, federal prosecutors have launched more than 400 investigations in cases involving COVID-19 funds. And this is where all of us in the open government community come in. Open government can help mitigate the risk of corruption and capture, and can help ensure that countries achieve these vital goals. And it can do so because open government represents a unique approach that combines and connects two powerful drivers and forces of change. First, openness and transparency on stimulus funds by governments on the supply side of governance, combined with, second, the participation and engagement of citizens, civil society, businesses, accountability institutions on the demand side of governance, so they can together shape the programs and together follow the money to ensure it achieves its intended goals. And you know, this collaborative approach is what governments and civil society have together sought to do through OGP. Over the last decade, government reformers and civil society activists across 78 countries have co-created more than 4,000 reform commitments, several of which are important innovations in open government and citizen engagement, which can now be applied to COVID-19 response and recovery. So to give you two examples, first, through Italy's Open Coesione platform, the government disclosed the details of 1 million projects financed by 100 billion euros of EU financing on an open online platform, but then mobilized massive public information campaign to empower citizens, including high school students, to become on-the-ground monitors of these projects. Second example, through the Philippines Open Roads Initiative, the government disclosed the details of road expenditures, often geocoded. Civil society then carried out social audits of these roads, and the formal audit institutions started leveraging citizens' social audits to mandate a government response, saving $300,000 for each ghost road that was identified. These kinds of open government approaches can now be applied to the two principal stages of COVID-19 recovery. First, open decision-making over stimulus funds, and second, open tracking of implementation to follow the money. So consider first open decision-making. We need openness and oversight in the decision-making process to ensure that resources accrue to the most needy rather than the most powerful. Governments need to disclose who got the funds and how, especially to make decision-making process inclusive and to amplify the voice of historically marginalized groups and those made vulnerable by COVID-19. You see, these massive stimulus packages offer an unprecedented opportunity to rectify societal inequities that have been laid bare by the pandemic and to build a more just recovery. And for this, we also need transparency and oversight in lobbying, such as what Chile and Ireland, such as in the UK and Slovakia, to ensure that bailouts, contracts, stimulus funds are not captured by the politically connected. In Latin America, the Beneficial Ownership Transparency Community of Practice, which has government representatives and civil society official organizations from Chile, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Mexico, can help in this way. The next step in this process is open tracking of implementation. And this must begin with open budgets on which we are working with GIFT and open aid flows so that citizens can follow the money. Ministries of finance must disclose their expenditures, including COVID-19 emergency spending, in regularly updated open data. But here we already see a challenge because the 2020 Open Budget Survey finds that 2/3 of the 117 surveyed countries do not have a basic level of budget transparency. We also
transparencia presupuestaria. También necesitamos que las organizaciones,
such as the IMF and the World Bank, to disclose the terms of more than $60 billion in financing for COVID recovery that they're providing for Latin America. Governments also need to open the contracts, the procurement contracts, to the public to fight corruption and spur an economic recovery. You know, when Ukraine disclosed all its contracts as open data and empowered citizens to report violations, the government reported saving $1 billion in 2 years. 82% of the private sector reported reduced corruption. And importantly, there was a 50% increase in new businesses, including SMEs, bidding for public contracts. In Paraguay and Colombia, the government is disclosing emergency contracts as open data, which the civil society monitors, including for price differentials for COVID-19 supplies. But you know, more broadly than that, Paraguay and Colombia have in fact gone beyond just the contracts to adapt a very well-known accountability platform known as Mapa Inversiones,
rendición de cuentas, que se conoce como,
which now has COVID-19 expenditures, including as open data and geocoded visualizations of COVID-19 spending, COVID-19 contracts, medical procurements, social programs, and nutritional subsidies for families. So for both open decision-making and for open tracking of implementation, citizens need to be able to freely speak, shape, and oversee these stimulus packages. And that is why the protection of basic civic liberties, of media freedoms, and access to information is a vital precondition. Unfortunately, several countries have gone in the opposite direction of shutting down civic space. According to a recent report by the Civic Space Guardian, published by Directorio Legislativo, it finds that in 9 countries in Latin America, access to information has been restricted during the pandemic. It is vital to roll back these restrictions to enable citizens to freely shape and oversee the design and recovery of stimulus packages. So, for all of these actions to happen, our main call for action is for a campaign in every country to shape and monitor COVID-19 stimulus and safety net packages. This will require complementary and mutually reinforcing actions by governments, civil society, businesses, accountability institutions, and international donors. OGP provides a ready country-owned platform that can convene these multiple stakeholders and allow them to make mutually reinforcing commitments through OGP action plans. And to give you a concrete example, right after me, Nigerian Minister Clem Agba Finance, Minister of Finance Clem Agba will speak on how Nigeria is notably leveraging the OGP multi-stakeholder forum and the OGP action plan for COVID-19 monitoring, including through an excellent roundtable that Minister Agba convened just last month. We will hear from Minister Pereira Olmedo on how Paraguay is using open government for COVID-19. We are advancing similar approaches in Armenia, Italy, and several countries. You know, the OGP community in the Americas has provided traditionally the vibrant source of energy for the partnership and will undoubtedly inspire and lead the way in open response and open recovery to COVID-19. And it is in that spirit that I close with the following call to action. We call on all governments and civil society organizations in this call to join forces to convene OGP multi-stakeholder forums focused specifically on making specific commitments for transparency, participation, and oversight of COVID-19 stimulus and safety net packages through OGP action plans. Even if the OGP process is coordinated by a different lead ministry, ministries of finance as the custodians of the stimulus package have a vital role in engaging in the OGP process to ensure that these massive amounts of money achieve their intended purposes. We call on all governments to transparently disclose COVID-19 budgets and contracts in real-time open data, make the decision-making process inclusive of vulnerable groups, disclose transparent registers of company ownership, of lobbying, of safety net beneficiaries. We call on governments to protect civic space, media freedoms, and access to information. We call on civil society organizations and business associations to engage in this process, to shape the design of these programs, to raise awareness amongst beneficiaries on what they are supposed to receive, to follow the money to the end user, provide feedback and monitor government response. We call on development partners to ensure transparency of all funds, to integrate government transparency and responsiveness in donor-supported programs, and to build the capacity of civil society organizations to mobilize and provide citizen feedback. So, to close, if stakeholders in OGP multi-stakeholder forums, if all of you in this call were to join forces to multiply collective strength and collective courage, and together respond to this call to action, you can make a big difference at this point in human history. You can write a positive chapter for COVID-19 recovery, an open recovery, which alleviates human suffering by ensuring that these massive stimulus and safety net packages reach their intended beneficiaries. You see, open government is not a platitude. It is a powerful, dynamic force that can unleash and empower government reformers, civil society activists, businesses, and others to forge coalitions to save millions of lives and livelihoods facing unprecedented devastation in a pandemic. They can galvanize these actors to build a better system that puts citizens at the heart of governance. They can build a more just society for better times to come. Thank you very much. Back to you, Rosario.
Muchísimas gracias, Sanjay. Y bueno, como verán,
Thank you, Sanjay. And as you can see, this is a very important space because it brings together people from the budgetary and fiscal spaces and those who are involved in open government organizations. And we're going to hear more about specific cases. And this is a call to action. We believe that there are actions that can be taken in this context of today, and we're inviting you to join forces. As Sanjay mentioned, we also have here today Minister of Budget and National Planning. And we're going to talk about cases in Latin America as well. We're very grateful for your presence, and we're going to see if Minister Prince Clem Ikanade Agba can tell us a little bit about their process of open recovery in Nigeria.
Yeah, good evening from Nigeria. I hope you can all hear me. Okay. Thank you very much for having me, and Sanjay, it's a pleasure seeing you again, speaking so passionately about open government and open government partnership. Prior to the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, Nigeria's Open Government Partnership Action Plan had made substantial provision to improve transparency and accountability, and looking for ways to plug revenue leakages and how to tackle corruption head-on. Our Ogp commitments include efforts to implement an open budget process with very strong public participation. We expect that this effort will result in improved ranking in the Open Budget Survey Index. When the pandemic started early this year, we realized that the assumptions that we had made in putting together our 2020 budget had drastically changed. Like you know, Nigeria is more of a mono-dependent economy on oil and gas, and about 70% of our foreign exchange comes from oil. So what happened with the decline in demand for crude led to excess supply of crude in the world market. And so oil price benchmark that we had put at $57 per barrel for our budget fell so low that in April, it went below $12 a barrel. In fact, the oil production also had to drop because OPEC and OPEC Plus had to respond to the supply situation in the world market. And as such, our production volumes were also reviewed downwards from 2.1 million barrels per day to about 1.4
de 2.1 millones.
Including condensate. So with our condensate, we're able to bring it up to about 1.7 billion barrels per day. Of course, this also affected the exchange rate regime because of the demand and supply forces for dollar. And the exchange rate that we initially had at 305 naira to $1 with the initial budget had to be revised upwards to 360 naira to $1. So, but what we did was to carry along Nigerians in this review process. Because of COVID, we couldn't have physical meetings like we used to have in a town hall. So what we did was to have virtual meetings with Nigerians and civil society organizations. And as we also engage our National Assembly in the interactive sessions, the Nigerians and civil society organizations were involved in all of these processes. This process we followed first for the approval of the original budget and also for the revision of the revised 2020 budget. The president also set up an economic sustainability committee to work on an economic sustainability plan that would ensure that even if we were to go into a recession, that our recession was not so deep and that we will have a quick recovery. That committee came up with a stimulus package of about 2.3 trillion naira. This stimulus covered conditional cash transfer. There were public works program. There was an MSME survivor fund, and also how we were able to build resilience in our health systems and improve health infrastructure across the country. Ours is peculiar because our constitution places the responsibility for primary health care on the subnational governments. Same thing too for basic education. But the federal government had to come to rescue at this stage when we realized that the infrastructure at that level and even at very tertiary health care level were dilapidated, and there was a need to have a quick and immediate response. Again, as we develop these stimulus packages, we engage Nigerians. One of the learnings from the engagements that I've seen, and this is a plus to COVID, is that we are now more able to cover more people than we used to. Because in the past, we gathered in a room of not more than 400-500. But making it virtual, we found that Nigerians from across the world, in the US, in Europe, in other parts of Africa, showed interest and participated in these discussions as they went along. For me, I see this as a way of bridging the trust gap that currently exists between government and the governed. And we have made a commitment to the civil society group that will continue to do this, irrespective of COVID, that we will try to ensure that every quarter we have such webinars to have those discussions. Just as Sanjay said, just last month, July 28th, I believe, I hosted a virtual high-level roundtable meeting with key stakeholders from government. And this time around, we are looking at the stimulus packages that have been put in place. How do we ensure that there is accountability, there is transparency, and we display integrity, and that Nigerians will be at peace and at home with what we are doing. So we have to ensure that the DG of the Budget Office, for instance, the Accountant General, the Auditor General, the Director General of the Bureau of Public Procurement, civil society organizations, private organizations, even our development partners, the World Bank, the UK DFID, UNECA, and of course the OGP support group were involved in this webinar that we had. It was very, very interactive. We took some learnings from the webinar, and we have promised and made a commitment that we will try and implement those suggestions that we have been given as a way of making the process much more transparent and more efficient. I like to say that we have already started the same process for our 2021 budget, where we've already engaged Nigerians on the 2021 to 2023 medium-term expenditure framework and the FSP. We are currently now at the National Assembly, where we've been having bilateral meetings and interactive sessions. And we are beginning to bring all the MDAs to the National Assembly to speak through their submissions, especially the MDAs where revenues come from. Because we have noticed that oftentimes when we talk about budget, people only look at the right side of the budget and don't look at the left. Everybody seems to be interested in the expenditure, how to spend. No one is interested in how to bring in the revenue. And so as a way of improving that transparency and accountability to Nigerians, we have brought in almost all the government-owned enterprises into the budget process. So about 60 government-owned enterprises have been put in, and we're interrogating them on their revenues and expenditure before the Nigerian public. We have a commitment on improving procurement. And then this includes the development of an electronic portal for disclosure of all government-related procurements. Like you know, we call this NOCOPO. It's currently in the public domain, but based on some feedbacks that have been received, it is being updated at the moment. However, the Bureau of Public Procurement has issued some emergency procedures for procurement of the COVID-19 pandemic items for relief. We have signed on with the World Bank and the IMF to both a post-COVID audit. And the Auditor General has a responsibility to submit a report on all the expenditures around COVID by August 2021. You know, we also have a commitment around the beneficial ownership register during our first implementation cycle of the National Action Plan. Like you know, beneficial ownership transparency has gained prominence in the last decade. It's a commitment of such a magnitude requires that it has to have a legal backing. So our KAMA law was sent back to the National Assembly to review, to make provisions for beneficial ownership register. I am glad to tell the House that that law has now been passed by the National Assembly and has been assented to by the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So this is another area of win for us in this government. It goes clearly to show the deep commitment of our President, President Muhammadu Buhari, towards transparency. And he has mandated that all companies involved in the procurement of goods and services, as part of Nigeria's response to the pandemic, will publicly disclose all beneficial owners of the companies with which they are doing business. I guess I have to stop here. I would be with you for another 5-10 minutes, and then I'll take my leave to join another meeting at 5. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for joining us and sharing your experience. Muchísimas gracias. La verdad que es un honor poder
Thank you very much. It is a real honor to listen to experiences from other parts of the world and also to be able to share the ones from Latin America. We have 21 countries represented in this meeting at this point. I would also like to greet and thank Warren Grafchik, the CEO from IBP. He was also chair of the Open Government Partnership, and he's a founding member. He knows the work of the partnership very closely. Thank you for your participation. So without further ado, we will now begin to share some of the cases from Latin America. If you have any comments or questions, please use the chat. If you want to introduce yourselves, you can use the chat too. Some people have already started doing so. First of all, I would like to offer the floor to Minister Pereira Viedos, Minister of the Technical Secretariat of Economic and Social Planning from Paraguay. He's also part of the Economic National Plan. Thank you very much for your presence. Let's hear about how you are implementing a comprehensive approach from the perspective of the Open Government Partnership, or rather, with an open government approach. Thank you, Rosario. Good morning. It's a great pleasure for us to be here with all of you today, with such important representatives from the different countries, and to talk about such an important topic, open government. I would like to especially greet Mr. Sanjay Pradhan, as well as all representatives from the 21 countries that are here today. And then I would like to do a brief introduction to talk about how Paraguay today is developing and implementing an open government approach. This is an initiative by 64 countries. They promote transparency, civil engagement, accountability within the government. Among other things, we are also now trying to use innovation technology and have the involvement of more young people in Paraguay. To be innovative is not only about working with very different people, especially in areas where we have big gaps. It's also about focusing on our main challenge in Paraguay, to build public policies that will actually address the unsatisfied needs in our country. This situation is actually very obvious now because of the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the entire world, and it is having an impact not only in terms of the health sector, but also the economic sector. Our development plans have to be rearranged. We had to refocus the plan and focus maybe on issues such as unemployment, because the pandemic has increased unemployment substantially. We are now focusing on the first SDG, the fight against poverty. All our policies, therefore, will be focused on the ODG 1 and number 3. Fighting poverty is not easy. I believe the 2030 agenda will face a lot of challenges that will need to be adjusted. And SDG number 3 talks about healthcare and well-being. Here, we need to focus also our efforts. We need to improve people's well-being in a sustainable and equitable way. We need other measures. We need other ways of facing this situation. We will continuously review our public policy, understanding that there are many people living in vulnerable areas. Well-being is about health, and as a whole, our public health sector has been highly affected because of the pandemic. All the efforts made by the government are focusing on strengthening the social protection system, the safety net system. There are a lot of people that live in poverty, and the government is making great efforts to try to focus on the first 1,000 days of childhood. I was just at a meeting with the president, and we were talking about children, and we also had the Minister of Health. Now I would like to talk a little bit about our experience with the pandemic. In my secretary, as well as in other ministries, We are part of a special committee to oversee public procurement. We know that the great commitment of the open government is to try to look for transparency in all its forms, but also to try to improve the quality of public expenditures. And when we talk about public expenditures, politicians always talk about demanding more resources. The Technical Planning Secretariat in this regard is including a planning system based on results, precisely in order to be able to control expenditures and review and monitor public budgets of the different government entities or agencies. Today, citizens are demanding a great deal of things. They are demanding accountability, transparency, greater quality. We believe that the main problem is not only about resources, but about managing such resources. When we see the execution percentage of the budget, we see that we're talking about 57 to 60%, and not many are above that. That is an indicator that the problem is not about having resources available, but about how to manage such resources. In that regard, the issue of planning is many times misunderstood until we have a crisis such as this pandemic. Many countries had to react to the pandemic. A lot of planning was needed, taking into account that the pandemic is actually very negatively affecting all sectors, not only the health sector, but also the economic sector. We had to shut down the economy for 120 days. That created a lot of problems, increased unemployment, and now we are gradually reactivating the economy. And this is forcing us to being much more efficient with limited resources in order to be able to satisfy the numerous needs that are always unsatisfied in our society. In this regard, one of the examples that I would like to share with you is the following.
And this is with all of the organizations installing the technical secretariat, joint roundtables to be able to join forces between organized civil society and the state, and to really look for a better connection between the government and the civil society, trying to reach a grand national agreement that would really allow us to have an inclusive, participatory, normative approach, gathering opinions from all sectors and using these mechanisms to build better and more inclusive public policies. With the government, with the open government system, we've developed a dashboard for the Ministry of Public Health and the Ministry of Finance, where the citizens can join through a link and monitor what kinds of medical supplies and purchases and equipment have gotten to the various hospitals and the various major cities of the country. And I think it's an obligation as public servants to give this information to our citizens and to share it with them so that we can recover what is being lost, which is citizen confidence with political actors. And the objective here is to have sustainable development. And our system of open government is the last opportunity that politicians have to create an environment of trust between them and citizens as they try to implement public policies to break with inequality and poverty that still exist in our countries. And I just have a minute left, so I want to say that this platform allows us at the Technical Secretariat and at the Open Government Office to have greater connections with citizens. I think citizens today are asking to be heard, are demanding to be heard. They want a space in which they can express themselves, but they're also requiring accountability. They want to know how their taxes are being used and how their private sector taxes are being channeled. And so this is something that we need to do to be able to share, not just to be accountable, but also to create this great national agreement that will, in the end, be what allows us to move forward. I think open government is something that we do all together. It's a path to it's not really the goal, but it's the path through which we can do away with inequality. And it's an individual commitment on the part of all of us and the part of all public institutions that make up the state, so that we can build more capacity, more well-being, that the average person in the street is feeling the results of our policies with more money in their pocket and with greater well-being. And so as a technical secretariat of planning, those are our principles that we guide ourselves by. And that's where we're putting all of our efforts in looking for mechanisms that will help us to create greater public policy for education and health, for economic reactivation, and a management system that is reflected by results in different areas. Thank you so much for this privileged space to be able to share with you at this time. I think it's a very relevant moment to talk about these points. And I think I want to tell you that from Paraguay, from the Technical Secretariat of Planning and all of our Office of Open Government, we're at your service, would be happy to share our experiences and to learn from you. And thank you very much. Thank you, Minister. I want to invite all of you to consult the links that have been shared here, because the accountability platform has been used in really interesting ways. And the system and the adaptation that they have made has made it much more responsive in times of emergency. So thank you so much for being with us today. And now I want to give the floor over to Claudia Marcela Mapaez. She's the Director of National Public Budget at the Ministry of Finance, and our point of contact for the Open Government Agenda. We'll turn the floor over to you, and then we'll hopefully have some time for questions. Thank you so much, Rosario. Thank you for OGP and GIFT for the invitation. We're so grateful for being able to be here to share experience with you. We have come precisely to use this platform as one of the primary tools to guarantee transparency and accountability and collaboration with different civil society sectors at this time of emergency, which is such a challenge. And it's one of the biggest challenges that we've had in the last years. And so the government is trying to create different tools that will help us to consolidate that transparency and that direct contact with citizens on a daily basis. I'll try to be very concrete. And we want to talk about our fourth National Action Plan for Open Government in Colombia, understanding that the principles of open government are not just exclusive to the executive, but they're cross-cutting to all public institutions, national and subnational. And so in Colombia, we've been trying to strengthen the vision of state, open state, to involve the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the national government in all of its agendas. I just want to emphasize three very specific things. And then the Vice President of the Republic and the Secretary of Transparency can go into further detail. The central thing is in the National Development Plan, which is our roadmap for the 4 years of government, that puts forth our vision of open government as a commitment of the government. And we've reached this moment, and we now have this perfect opportunity so that this agenda can become reality in different ways, not just with the concretion of the 4th action plan, but with the various tools that we want to tell you about. Of course, the action plan is taking place now within this context of the pandemic, and which means we have to take advantage of the opportunity to work on commitments that will allow us to respond to the needs of citizens in very concrete ways that have to do with budgetary fiscal transparency, to share data and to share data that is of quality and to generate a culture of informed social control. In Colombia, we have various tools that we've developed for public contracting. There's a whole mechanism so that citizens can find out in real time who's being hired and how much the contracts are worth during this time of emergency. And the Ministry of Communications has a net of open data, information about the emergency time now. And this helps us to have very timely social oversight. And Dr. Marcela will talk about the framework of open government and the 4th plan of action, what the very specific commitments and actions are, and which data and input we're working on to generate this culture of participation by citizens. So I want to give the floor over to Dr. Marcela. And I just wanted to let you know that our commitment is very strong to open government, having to do with development, fiscal transparency, because what this means is that the time of pandemics is the perfect opportunity to really make this commitment real. Thank you very much. Marcela Numa. Good morning and good evening, depending on where you are. It's a pleasure to see many of you again. Those of you who are participating in this panel, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to tell you what we're doing in Colombia in terms of transparency in the framework of OGP. As Armando said, I'll talk a little bit about the time pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, which I hope will be a phase that will come soon. But I'll tell you also what we've done during this time of the pandemic. And I think it's clear for all of us that we've really made a lot of progress in transparency in the last 2-3 months. We've made more progress than we have in several years, because we've had to accelerate a lot of things that we have had planned in terms of online applications and work, meetings that we've had to do online. And I can say that we really have achieved a lot in a short period of time. And our mental culture before was along the lines of, oh no, that's complicated and we can't do that. But now we realize that we can do it. We did a lot of things very quickly. In a month, we were able to reinvent ourselves a little bit, reinvent processes and procedures. And many of the countries who are here will know exactly what I'm talking about, because you've had to go through many of the same things during this time. Leonel, perhaps you can help me present, put my presentation on the screen. Okay, so with this procedure, as Armando said, the commitment that we have had is firm. And can you tell me if you can see my presentation on the screen? Yes, we see it. Mm-hmm. Great. So I was talking about pre-pandemics because there's some things that we were able to do starting in last year. And as Armando was already saying, our National Development Plan that was published in March of last year confirmed many of the commitments that we had already acquired as a country and that we're continuing. The issue of transparency is not just a government issue, but a matter of the state. And this government has assumed the responsibility in that way, because these commitments are not just for this administration, but rather as a commitment of the country. No matter who the president or the administration is. Starting in last year, we have made progress on the matter of public participation in the budget. Starting last year, we started on the International Day of Open Data and had a very interesting event with civil society, the Ministry of Finance, the Department of Planning, on an issue that we had been thinking about a lot. And we had made a lot of progress in this meeting that we had about how to deal with gender equity with a view to building a responding to a request that civil society had made of us, and to help civil society see that we are actually looking at very important issues that have to do with women. So all of this happened in 2019. It was Ministry of the Finances, civil society, academia, and from the presidency's office and a couple of other agencies as well. The National Development Plan, work was done. I think we finished it. We were working on it in February last year. It's our roadmap that began in May of 2018, and it included a very important issue for us that we've been working on during that same period, which has to do with budgetary tracers, which has to do with looking at each budgetary item and some of the cross-cutting policies that are so important for us right now in Colombia, which has to do with the peace accords. As part of the context, our country has been coming out of a process from the time of President Sanchez's administration. It's been about 4 years now, since 2017, that we've been implementing peace accords, 4 years. Peace accords with extra legal groups, and we were able to reach agreements with them, and we've been following up on the commitments made by the state. This administration continued with that commitment. The issue of women, of course, in addition to the Peace Corps. So we wanted to measure progress in each one of these lines.
In 2019, we continued to work on all this. We coordinated with other agencies. We worked on minorities, Afro-descendants, indigenous peoples, the Tron community that we have in my country. We also educated different entities about how to carry out these policies and how to face the new initiative. We also adjusted the information that we had available in order to focus on the new realities that we were facing. And that's based on the tasks that were identified in the National Development Plan. Based on regarding this budget tracer, so to speak, I would like to recognize GIFT because
tema de trazadores y obviamente todo el marcado de todos los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible también que tiene y los compromisos que tiene Colombia en estos ODS. Se hicieron todas las reuniones virtuales también, con la ayuda de la GIF también, y Lorena, que ahí debo también decirlo de todas las experiencias internacionales, que realmente estos espacios son súper importantes y súper valiosos para poder revisar las mejores prácticas y poder hacer un buen trabajo, que creo que fue el que se hizo en Colombia con la implementación de esos trazadores. Debo decir con éxito que ya hemos implementado el trazador del acuerdo de paz, el trazador de equidad de la mujer. Estamos en construcción del de minorías étnicas, pero pues digamos el tema de la pandemia que era el siguiente paso, o sea, hicimos acuerdo de paz primero, después equidad de género primero, y vamos a seguir con el tema de equidad. Hemos estado un poquito retrasados por el tema de la pandemia porque lo que nos obligó, y como ya lo habían dicho muchos de los colegas que hablaron previamente, pues la ciudadanía estaba reclamando ese tema de qué está pasando con la atención y la coyuntura del COVID. Entonces nuestros esfuerzos se vieron enfocados en mostrar también y revisar cómo también adecuábamos los sistemas para mostrarle a la ciudadanía qué se estaba haciendo con el tema de la atención de la emergencia y de la pandemia y lo que estaba haciendo el gobierno para atenderla. Este es nuestro compromiso pues después de todo el proceso de co-creación que ya lo habló Armando. Este es nuestro compromiso activo que creemos nosotros. Nuestra meta era tener todo para septiembre. Afortunadamente pues aceleramos y podemos tener mucho de esto que ya hicimos y ya lo pusimos en producción y ya es una realidad para nosotros. Sigamos. Como les comenté, señora.
Si pudiéramos ir cerrando las ideas porque
listo, perfecto.
Para escuchar.
Ya me quedan dos slides más y ya no.
Perdón.
Tranquila. Obedeciendo, pues ya como les dije, ya es una realidad que el proyecto de presupuesto del 2021 nosotros lo entregamos en julio de este año, ya lo entregamos a finales de julio, y ya entregamos estos dos trazadores y ya les podemos entregar como anexos al proyecto de ley de presupuesto, ya es una realidad. Estos son dos anexos que ya entregamos y ya les podemos, este es el link de lo cual lo pueden consultar. Sigamos. Por el tema de la pandemia, ya lo han dicho también, nosotros también desde el momento en que nos tocó afrontar este tema, lo hicimos con tres momentos importantes, y era conseguir recursos, mitigar la emergencia en temas salud y económico, que es lo que todos hemos hecho, y por último, desde lo que tiene que ver con la transparencia, es mostrarle a la ciudadanía que esos pesos...
Finally, in terms of transparency, we had to obtain new resources. And then in terms of the transparency portal, I've already shown it and you could already see what we did. And we had to show not only all the resources that were obtained, but also to mark every single dollar that we had in there, where the money was coming from and where it was going to be dispersed. And this is a very important thing for us. We wanted to make sure that every single dollar was invested in the pandemic response. We had to consult, that's where you can see how much was collected, how it was used, what contract it was allocated to, how was the public procurement process. All this information is very important, not only to know how much, but who got the money, for how much was the contract awarded. And all this information is available thanks to this tool. The tool was developed really fast, and basically the tool was actually available, but the portal had to be developed and now the information is available. Now, in terms of our commitment, we will continue to work on the financial issues as well as the public procurement system, so that citizens can know what contracts were awarded, to whom, for how much, and so on and so forth. And all this is functioning through is available through the portal. We have also had different meetings with different universities. We've done sessions about budget education. Basically, it was about talking about the budget in a way that citizens can understand the information. There are videos that are being uploaded for citizens to understand the budget cycle, what the general budget is about. As Armando said, everything is based on open data. And then we also need to promote them. So it's not only about having information available, but also making sure that people read or access such information. And then, yes, the pandemic has meant that we had a few setbacks and delays, but we are still working hard trying to open up these spaces with academia, with different sectors. We're working with universities to have fora available to have a discussion, and also so that they can tell us what citizens are expecting from us as budget authorities with regard to transparency and open budgets. That's what I had to share with all of you. I hope I didn't take any more time. Thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to share what we are doing, but also learning from others are doing. All the information that we've received has been extremely valuable. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Claudia. Me gustaría darle la palabra a Paola Palacios. Ella es coordinadora.
Thank you, Claudia. I would like now to offer the floor to Paola Palacio. She is from Mexico, and she's from International Transparency. They've promoted the creation of a sub-working group within a forum that is leading the process in Mexico in order to carry out actions that have to do with transparency and accountability within the COVID-19 context. Paula has the floor. Paula, go ahead. Thank you, Rosario. Good morning. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And just as a reminder, Mexico is a federation. And this is relevant because it's different when you talk at the different levels of government. I'm going to talk about a federal government. And the Mexican civil society has been working at a national level, but also at a federal level from the first days of March. There are different initiatives trying to monitor the government response at a federal and national level. At the federal level, through the Open Government Partnership, a sub-working group was activated with civil society and as well as government agencies in order to facilitate access to information about the use of funds, actions, contracts, public procurement processes during the health emergency, as well as during the aftermath when we were feeling the economic impact of the pandemic. At a state level, what we have seen from civil society has been a mixed bag. We've seen different types of formats for the information that was shared. In general terms, the idea is to have a single platform to cover the health emergency and the economic recovery. In terms of the challenges, we understand that there is an important deficit in terms of budget transparency or fiscal transparency. Through an analysis that we did, we identified great challenges at a state level. Only 20 states are publishing budget information or fiscal information, and they represent more than 28 billion pesos. In the case of the federal government, within the same study, we identified that the gap of that the government promised $22 billion to mitigate the pandemic. So we're talking about 650 billion pesos that the government will allocate to the response to the pandemic. There are therefore many challenges in terms of knowing exactly how these funds are being dispersed. We have another challenge in terms of public procurement. At the state level, we identify that 18 out of 32 states do not have any type of transparency in terms of the public procurement process for the health emergency. We're talking about 8 billion pesos in terms of public expenditure at a state level. And at a federal level, what we have done is that the multi-stakeholder working group, the federal government, is the one that coordinates all the different government agencies, and the NIDE, the National Institute on Transparency, Information Access, and Personal Data Protection. All of us are promoting to make sure that efforts focus on the health emergency and the recovery. And all this includes everything that I'm saying: plans, actions, resources. I'm talking about fiscal transparency, budget donations, acquired debt, and so on and so forth. And on the other hand, we're talking about contracts that have to do with the COVID-19 pandemic within the framework of public procurement. So basically the whole procurement system. We know that coordinated work with different government agencies has different rhythms, different paces, but from civil society, we wanted to see that the health, economic, and social emergency should have, with that emergency, we need to do everything at the same pace in terms of information dissemination. We understand that the government, the different authorities are making efforts at different levels, but we need to make sure that there are common rules in place based on the Mexican legal framework. This multi-stakeholder working group has also addressed other strategic issues within the Open Government Partnership. These are commitments under the 4th Action Plan in Mexico. We have the 4th Action Plan since 2012. In the case of this 4th Action Plan, we tried to also address other commitments that had to do with open government and COVID-19. In the case of real beneficiaries, or in the case of social programs, this could be 2 cases. The work carried out within this subgroup could be interrelated, and instead of duplicating efforts, we should function in a much more efficient manner in that way. Since I don't have a lot of time, this is rather the information that I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you for your participation and your interest. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Paola. La verdad que es muy interesante lo que están haciendo y cómo están usando capacidad ya instalada, ¿no? Esa articulación que ya venían generando hace muchos años y la ponen a disposición de una situación de emergencia como esta. Las y los invito a hacer preguntas o comentarios en el chat. La idea es que podamos conversar un poquito al final. Y sin más, le doy la palabra a los representantes de Argentina. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Gustavo Merino, director de Desarrollo de Aplicaciones de Administración Financiera, y a Carolina Cornejo, quien es directora de Gobierno Abierto y punto de contacto de OGP. Y Argentina además este año copreside la Alianza del Gobierno Abierto, así que un gusto tenerlos aquí.
Gracias, Roy, y gracias a todos.
Thank you so much. I want to reinforce the messages that we had at the beginning.
Wrong channel, creo.
And so in 2019, I want to respond to a question that came up in chat, because there was a change in administration, but they always rely on what happened in the previous administration. We don't turn off a button and turn on a button for the next administration. There's always a continuity, and that's been true for open government initiatives. They go through administration because they're state policies. And so when we took over the co-presidency of the partnership, that was certainly the case. And the conviction is to move forward with the 4th plan, with the co-presidency, and with the initiative of open government. Obviously, the pandemic has made us rethink our situation. And we've been working very closely on this campaign, understanding that this is the time when we can really emphasize collaboration, the responses that have to be made in a region. And so we need that collective intelligence also to be able to come up with the necessary responses for the recovery. Various countries are going through different phases at different times, but we can learn from each other. Concretely, I wanted to share with you the call to action to open government, especially because of the magnitude of in economic terms and social terms of what's happening now. And I can tell you that in Argentina, about a month ago, we published in open format data from different programs for small, medium, and large businesses, as well as social support programs. And that meant that we had to work very intensively in internal coordination, especially because the organizations that are implementing these policies are in different areas. Social security, production, industrial production support, and also in the legislature and the cabinet, various matters of open government. So something that I think that's, rather than telling you about the whole experience, I think a key factor is not just the political commitment, which of course is probably the most important thing when it comes to open government, but also the capacity of interinstitutional coordination. These factors continuously come to play, because without support for these kinds of actions, we wouldn't have been able to publish data that helps beneficiaries overcome the moment of crisis, and especially to help workers who have now receiving lower income or no income at all. All of the data that we're publishing have to do with different dimensions: the amounts, the distribution over the territory, the conditions that people are living in, what situations the various enterprises are in, the various rounds of the benefits that are coming out. These benefits have to do with salary support, credits, and social support. There's a lot of assistance programs that we need to make transparent, not just by providing information, but also by having open participation for analyzing the impact of the policies and the reach of the policies. It's important to us to do this, not just for the sake of transparency, but also because of the magnitude and the reach of these programs economically and socially, and because all of these funds are being moved very quickly. And finally, to be able to make sure Gustavo has a chance to speak, he's an expert on this issue. We really wanted to share with you in this context because these policies are based on previous reforms that if we had not made, we would not have been able to move so quickly. Without the commitments made previously by the government of Argentina, we would not today be able to make any progress in opening up the data to the public. We understand that OGP is an excellent platform, and it allows us a way of working and measuring open government. But this year, because of the pandemic, many countries postponed our action plans, but that doesn't mean that we can't work among the various institutions to be able to move forward reforms on open government. I think it's also important to share with you that the principles of fiscal transparency need to be reevaluated in the context of this pandemic, especially when it comes to funds that's going towards social assistance programs. Right now, we need to share experiences with each other and learn from each other. I want to make sure Gustavo has some time to talk a little bit about this initiative and the commitment that has been made by the country. Well, first of all, thank you to all of you for this opportunity. And as Carol said, the idea is that we had the third plan for open government without knowing that we were going to have the pandemic, but we wanted to make sure we could use the same tools to make sure that the assistance programs for individuals and productive industries could really be successful. First of all, the financial management system focused on continuing management so that the funds could be executed and to get very quickly to their destination. What I want to show you right now here is how we were able to track the budgeting process. Can you see the screen now? Okay, great. Basically, when we did our third plan of open government, we developed a strategy to work with civil society. And it's a way of seeing how budget programs work together and turn into public policy. I want to show you a very quick example and a tool that's been available for quite some time to be able to implement this in emergency. So as you can see below, within the health emergency, as Carolina said, at first, of course, no one knew the pandemic was coming. And the budget was put together. And of course, they had to quickly put together an assistance package for employment and production. And for those who want to see in more detail, we are using this tool. It's a table of data that's available to citizens. And since we were already publishing budgetary implementation information on a daily basis, both in terms of income and expenditures, we were also able to, if you want to analyze even further, we could also look at this budgetary execution in a format that's much more detailed. And you can see during the time of emergency how much was assigned to which organizations and to which provinces. Here are some transferences that went to a particular province called Córdoba. We can see day by day when the credits were given or when they were committed, when they were given and when they were spent. And that's from the national budget information. But I wanted to show you this particular snapshot because I think it represents the pandemic and what kind of information we're able to show. Any researcher can get this information and you can build something from it. We can make graphics, for example. Sorry, the sound is a little bit low. These are reports about budgetary assignations. And basically what you're able to see is the report in open budget format, the national budget in terms of its evolution and execution. And you can say that we can put this information into the hands of citizens and anyone who's interested in researching so they can learn where public funds ended up. So basically, that's what I wanted to share with you. I'm very grateful also that we're able to share this with the network and to all the colleagues. Also, thank you to Carolina for her support. And we're so glad to have GIFT as an ally in this effort. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So I think what's important here is that these solutions aren't done immediately. They're at least in minimum medium-term work. But it's important to look behind and see what we have been building over all this time. Sometimes there are processes that tire us out and we think they're not taking us where we want to go. But if you look at it in a broader political context, you can see how institutions and processes and tools have been built that end up being extremely useful at various points in history. There's a comment in the chat that has to do with the publication of information from the Comptroller's Office. I don't know if you'd like to answer that for everyone, or if perhaps someone has a question, a comment, or an idea. Rosario?
Yes, here we're talking about citizen participation, the different types of citizens who are specialists in different issues. And I wanted to say that we're working hand in hand with the controller during this pandemic time. They are using all this data and they're following up on all the budget allocations. That key has been extremely useful because there's been a lot of media coverage about whether contracts are being the right contracts, if they're hiring the right people. And it's not like, oh, they were meant to sell meat and now they're selling chicken. It's a silly example, but that's what I mean. It's about taking care of the resources because they're very scarce. And I wanted to add just this comment to the presentation that we just got from Marcela. Thank you, Juan Pablo, you have the floor. Yes, I wanted to highlight two things that I believe explain very well these successful stories. The first one has to do with professional civil servants. At the end of the day, our friends from Nigeria, from Paraguay, from Colombia, from Argentina, they basically have been promoting this agenda for a long time. And sometimes there are political hurdles because politicians don't want to listen to it or even oppose these efforts. Today, we have people that have passed from one government to another, and in spite of the adversities, they've maintained their momentum and they've continued to promote this agenda. The second thing that I wanted to highlight that is equally important is the role to be played by civil society. Everyone has said so. If there is no strong, robust, sustained demand, sometimes accusatory, other times constructive, it's very hard to actually do this. Resiliency, continuity, all of this is also explained through the dialogue with civil society, mutual support, collaboration, cooperation. Thank you. Thank you, Juan Pablo. No doubt. There is a question or a comment in the chat actually regarding precisely what you just said, to overcome changes in the government after elections. Based on our experience from the support unit, we've seen quite successful stories in that regard. We've seen successful stories in terms of the open government community to make sure that the principles become a necessary part of the dialogue with the government, and the role played by civil society was key in that sense. Does anyone would anyone like to take the floor to offer any comments or clarifications, questions? You're completely overwhelmed with the information that we shared. Well, I would like to thank the quality of, because of the quality of this session, I would like to thank you all for your presence, for your interest, your patience. It was very exciting to see all these familiar faces. And it's very encouraging to see the importance placed by OGP on budget transparency or fiscal transparency. We believe there will be even greater collaboration in the future, and we're very pleased with that. Thank you. Now, through the chat, I will share a very brief survey, but it would be very helpful if you could fill it out, because it will help us get to know each other better and continue to work together. We will also share resources and the points of contact of the open government agenda in each country, as well as the contact information of the staff in the support unit. We are always open to collaboration. Without further ado, I would just like to thank you all for your presence, and hopefully we will be able to coordinate our efforts so that we can gain or achieve great goals. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. Good afternoon. And good luck with all the meetings that you have ahead. Before you leave, very quickly, we will present the fiscal data manual for COVID on Wednesday. This is an important manual for follow-up efforts. It has a lot to do with what you've heard here today regarding, for example, what type of data you need to address an emergency. In the case of Nigeria, Paraguay, they talked about investments. In Paraguay, they also talked about physical goals, about expenditures. In Argentina, we saw an example that we don't see very often in terms of beneficiaries of fiscal expenditures and open data. So we will talk about what needs to be published.
Sobre estos ejemplos en específico que se han presentado.
And regarding the specific examples that were shared, they are excellent examples about how data is being put together to have a greater context of within the pandemic, so that we can have also a much better impact. That's all I had to share. And also thank you to all the speakers. The initiatives are amazing and they're not easy to carry out. Thank you, Lorena and Albertina, for your support.
Thank you. Bye, Rosario.
Thank you, everyone.
Hasta luego.
Hasta luego, muchas gracias.